humor, had developed what most civilized species like to call an ecosystem. Not the quaint little forest and bunny rabbit variety that populated backwater planets, but the grand, sprawling, blood-soaked hierarchy that determined who ate whom across 17 different star systems. It was a delicate balance, really, maintained by eons of evolution, natural selection, and the occasional genocide that kept populations in check. At the top of this magnificent food chain sat the apex predators, those blessed creatures who had won the evolutionary lottery by developing the right combination of fangs, claws, poison sacs, and insufferable arrogance. They strutted through the galaxy with the confidence of beings who had never met anything they couldn't kill, digest, or at least intimidate into submission. Below them cascaded the various tiers of moderately dangerous species, the herbivorous pacifists, the scavengers, and at the very bottom, the unfortunate souls whose primary survival strategy involved running very fast and hoping for the best. The Nexus trade station existed as a sort of neutral ground where these various levels of the food chain could pretend to conduct civilized business without immediately attempting to devour each other. It was a marvel of engineering and diplomacy, a gleaming testament to interspecies cooperation that managed to function primarily because everyone agreed that killing customers was bad for business. The station's security force, composed of the most diplomatically minded thugs money could hire, maintained order through a combination of heavily armed peacekeepers and the subtle threat of being banned from the galaxy's most profitable trading hub. But beneath the veneer of civilized commerce, the old instincts remained. Predators still sized up potential prey. Prey species still calculated escape routes, and everyone still maintained the careful social dance that had kept the galaxy from descending into complete chaos for the past 3 centuries. It was a beautiful system, really, if you ignored the occasional accidents that occurred when someone forgot which species they were dealing with. The station's central marketplace buzzed with the kind of controlled chaos that made economists weep with joy. Merchants hawked everything from exotic spices to questionable technological marvels, while customers of every conceivable biological configuration haggled over prices in 17 different languages. The air filtration systems worked overtime to accommodate the various atmospheric preferences of the diverse clientele, creating an atmosphere that was breathable by most and comfortable to absolutely none. Security cameras monitored every corner, their advanced AI systems trained to recognize the subtle signs of impending violence before it escalated into the kind of incident that required cleanup crews and diplomatic apologies. The station's management had learned through expensive experience that nothing killed profits, quite like having to explain to the Galactic Commerce Authority why the main trading floor was now decorated with the remains of a diplomatic envoy. This was the stage upon which our tale would unfold. A perfect microcosm of galactic civilization, where the veneer of progress barely concealed the ancient dance of predator and prey. It was, in its own way, a masterpiece of controlled violence and barely restrained chaos, a testament to what intelligent species could accomplish when they really needed to make money. The various species that called this corner of the galaxy home had spent millennia perfecting the art of looking civilized while maintaining their edge. The Valkyrie had developed exquisite manners to go with their razor-sharp talons. The Thronox had learned to conduct business meetings without accidentally dissolving their negotiating partners with their caustic saliva. Even the notoriously aggressive Kreks had mastered the art of polite conversation, though they still struggled with the concept of indoor voices. But for all their progress, for all their technological advancement and cultural sophistication, they remained what evolution had made them. The predators among them still felt the ancient stirring when they scented weakness. The prey species still experienced that familiar tightening in their stomachs when something large and toothy entered their peripheral vision. No amount of civilization could completely override billions of years of evolutionary programming. And so the dance continued, day after day, in the sterile corridors and crowded marketplaces of the Nexus trade station. Beings who could calculate hyperspace jump coordinates and negotiate complex trade agreements still found themselves unconsciously evaluating each other through the lens of hunt or be hunted. It was, the station's philosophers noted with dry amusement, perhaps the most honest expression of civilization the galaxy had ever produced. The predator in question went by the name Vex'thul, though most beings who encountered him were too busy running or dying to inquire about proper pronunciation. He belonged to the Skarreth species, a proud race that had clawed their way to the top of their homeworld's food chain through a combination of superior reflexes, enhanced sensory organs, and an unfortunate tendency to view every other life form as either food or competition for food. Standing nearly 3 meters tall when fully extended, Vex'thul possessed the kind of physical presence that made insurance adjusters weep and mothers pull their offspring closer. His exoskeleton gleamed with the distinctive blue-black sheen that marked him as a mature Skarreth warrior, each segment perfectly articulated to provide maximum protection, while maintaining the fluid grace that made his species such efficient killers. 6 limbs extended from his torso, 4 of which ended in appendages that could serve as either manipulative hands or wickedly curved talons, depending on the situation's requirements. His head, if it could be called that, resembled something that might have given H.R. Geiger nightmares. Multiple sensory organs clustered around a central processing unit that served as his brain, each one specialized for detecting different types of prey. Heat sensors that could track a target's cardiovascular system from 50 meters away. Chemical analyzers that could determine fear levels from the faintest pheromone traces. Motion detectors so sensitive they could track a target's breathing patterns through solid walls. The Skarreth had earned their reputation as apex predators through millions of years of successful hunting across dozens of worlds. They were patient when patience served them, explosive when speed was required, and utterly ruthless when their prey showed signs of resistance. Their species had never developed what other races might call mercy, viewing it as an inefficient evolutionary dead end that served only to weaken the gene pool. Vex'thul had personally accounted for the termination of over 300 sentient beings across his 2-century lifespan, a record that had earned him considerable respect among his peers and a rather substantial bounty on his head from several interstellar law enforcement agencies. He wore both achievements with equal pride, viewing them as natural consequences of his superior evolutionary design. His hunting methodology had been honed through decades of experience and the accumulated wisdom of his ancestors. He preferred to study his prey extensively before making his move, analyzing their behavioral patterns, identifying their weaknesses, and determining the most efficient method of termination. A quick strike to sever the spinal column for bipedal species, a precise injection of paralytic venom for those with troublesome defensive capabilities, a simple crushing motion for the smaller, more fragile varieties. Today he stalked through the Nexus trade station with the casual confidence of a being who had never encountered anything he couldn't kill. His presence caused the familiar ripple effect that followed apex predators through crowded spaces. Conversations died mid-sentence. Prey species suddenly discovered urgent business elsewhere. Even other predator species found themselves unconsciously creating distance, their instincts recognizing a superior threat. The station's security forces tracked his movements through their surveillance systems, but they made no move to intervene. Vex'thul had committed no crimes within their jurisdiction, and his reputation actually served their purposes by keeping the more troublesome elements of the station's population in line. Nothing maintained order quite like the presence of something that could kill you faster than you could scream for help. He moved through the crowds with the fluid grace that marked his species, each step calculated to conserve energy while maintaining optimal positioning for a sudden strike. His sensory organs swept continuously across the environment, cataloging potential threats and opportunities with the methodical efficiency of a being born to hunt. Other patrons gave him a wide berth, their various survival instincts screaming warnings about the apex predator in their midst. But Vex'thul paid them little attention. He was here on business after all, not pleasure. Though he had to admit the quality of potential prey in this location was remarkably high. The central marketplace of the Nexus trade station provided what Vex'thul considered ideal hunting conditions. Multiple levels connected by walkways and transit tubes created a 3-dimensional maze of opportunities, while the constant flow of traffic offered perfect cover for a patient predator. The noise level would mask any sounds of struggle, and the diverse crowd meant that a few missing individuals would likely go unnoticed until long after he had departed. His sensory organs began their methodical sweep of the area, cataloging potential targets with the dispassionate efficiency of a being who had reduced murder to a science. A cluster of Valnari merchants huddled around a display of crystalline artifacts, their translucent skin flushed with the nervous bioluminescence that marked them as prey species. Interesting, but their defensive acid secretions would require specialized preparations he hadn't brought. A family of Skarreth wandered past, their fur rippling with the color changes that indicated excitement or stress. The adults would be challenging, but the juveniles showed promise. However, the Skarreth were known for their pack-hunting instincts, and taking one would inevitably bring the others. Efficient, perhaps, but messy. Near the food court, a solitary Vex'thul picked at what appeared to be a bowl of fermented plant matter. The insectoid species was known for their rapid reflexes and natural armor, but Vex'thul had dealt with their kind before. A precise strike to the joint where the head connected to the thorax would bypass their defensive capabilities entirely. The Vex'thul represented a moderate challenge with acceptable risk levels. His analysis continued as he moved through the crowd, his predatory instincts evaluating each potential target with the cold calculation that had kept his species at the top of the food chain. A group of Telkhani engineers debated the merits of various power coupling designs, their elongated skulls making them vulnerable to specific attack patterns. Several Moravex traders argued over exchange rates, their amphibious biology presenting interesting tactical considerations. Each species represented a different puzzle to solve, a unique combination of strengths and weaknesses that required specific approaches. The Telkhani were fragile but fast. The Moravec were slow but possessed remarkable regenerative capabilities. The Vex'thul were well armored but had predictable behavioral patterns. Vex'thul filed away the information for future reference, building a mental catalogue of hunting strategies. The beauty of the Nexus trade station lay in its diversity. Where else could a discerning predator find such a wide selection of prey species gathered in one convenient location? It was like a buffet designed by someone with excellent taste in exotic cuisine. The station's neutral ground policies meant that potential prey couldn't rely on their usual territorial advantages or pack-hunting strategies. His attention was drawn to a commotion near one of the larger merchant stalls, where a heated negotiation appeared to be reaching critical mass. A Drakmori trader was gesticulating wildly at a Quellian merchant, their respective species' natural antipathy evident in their aggressive postures. The situation had the potential to escalate into violence, which would provide excellent cover for his own activities. But as Vex'thul moved closer to observe the developing situation, his sensory organs detected something that made him pause. A familiar scent pattern, barely perceptible but unmistakably present. The chemical signature of a species he had encountered before, though never successfully hunted. His multiple eyes narrowed as he attempted to locate the source. The crowd shifted and flowed around him as he stood motionless. His predatory instincts suddenly focused on identifying this new element in his hunting ground. Something was different about this particular gathering. Something that his evolutionary programming was attempting to classify as either opportunity or threat. It took several moments for Vex'thul's sophisticated sensory apparatus to locate the source of the mysterious chemical signature. When he finally spotted the creature responsible, his first instinct was to dismiss it as a non-threat and continue his evaluation of more promising targets. The being in question appeared to be one of the smaller bipedal species, standing barely 2 meters tall and lacking any visible defensive adaptations. No natural armor plating, no obvious weapon systems, no chemical defense glands or toxic secretions. The creature's skin was a pale pinkish tone that suggested a species adapted to moderate climate conditions, while its sparse body covering indicated a lack of environmental challenges in its evolutionary development. It moved through the crowd with the casual gait of a herbivore, showing none of the alertness that marked experienced prey species. Vex'thul's initial assessment categorized the being as a Category 5 target, the lowest classification in his personal threat evaluation system. Category 5 typically included the elderly, infirm, or simply incompetent members of various prey species. Easy kills that required minimal effort and presented virtually no risk to the hunter. But something about this particular creature triggered a nagging sensation in the back of his consciousness, a subtle alarm that his predatory instincts couldn't quite identify. The being's movements were too relaxed, too confident for a prey species in the presence of an apex predator. Most sentient creatures possessed some form of threat detection capability, even if only at a subconscious level, yet this individual showed no signs of awareness that death stalked within striking distance. Vex'thul's sensory organs focused more intently on the mysterious being, attempting to resolve the contradiction between what his eyes observed and what his instincts whispered. The creature's posture suggested complete situational awareness, yet it displayed none of the tension that should accompany such awareness in a hostile environment. Its breathing remained steady, its heartbeat regular, its chemical emissions stable. Either this being was the most oblivious prey animal in the galaxy, or it was something else entirely. The predator's enhanced memory systems began accessing historical data about various species, cross-referencing the creature's physical characteristics against his accumulated knowledge. Bipedal, bilateral symmetry, apparent mammalian characteristics. The profile matched several species in his database, but none exactly. As he observed more closely, additional details became apparent. The being's eyes moved constantly but subtly, tracking multiple targets simultaneously with the kind of environmental awareness that suggested either exceptional paranoia or professional training. Its hands, initially appearing soft and vulnerable, showed the callous patterns that indicated familiarity with tools or weapons. Most tellingly, its positioning within the crowd maximized sight lines while minimizing potential approach vectors. This was not prey behavior. The realization struck Vex'thul like a plasma bolt to the neural cortex. This being wasn't displaying the relaxed confidence of an oblivious prey animal. It was demonstrating the calm assurance of something that had no natural predators to fear. The lack of defensive posturing wasn't due to ignorance or stupidity. It was the supreme confidence of an apex predator, secure in its position at the top of the food chain. His memory system suddenly accessed a rarely used file. Information gathered from survivor reports and intelligence briefings about a species that most predators preferred not to discuss. A species that had somehow clawed its way to the top of the galactic hierarchy despite lacking the physical advantages that typically defined apex predators. The humans. Terror, that most unfamiliar of emotions, began to seep into Vex'thul's consciousness as the pieces fell into place. The deceptively fragile appearance, the casual confidence in dangerous environments, the way other species unconsciously created distance without appearing to notice the creature's presence. All classic indicators of the galaxy's most feared apex predator. His multiple hearts began beating faster as his body prepared for the fight-or-flight response that he hadn't experienced since his juvenile years. Every instinct developed over millions of years of evolution was screaming the same message: get away from the human before it notices you. The full magnitude of his situation crashed down on Vex'thul as his memory systems completed their analysis. Humans weren't just another apex predator species, they were the apex predator species, the absolute pinnacle of the galactic food chain. Every other supposedly dangerous race in the galaxy collectively soiled themselves at the mere mention of human space. The Drachmori, who could tear through reinforced titanium with their bare claws, had officially declared human space off-limits to their warrior caste. The Kreks, whose berserker rage was legendary throughout 17 star systems, had instituted mandatory meditation classes after their first contact with human military forces. Even the mighty Thorgan Empire, conquerors of 300 worlds, had signed a non-aggression pact with humanity that essentially amounted to a formal surrender, and here was Vex'thul, who had spent his entire adult life as an apex predator, standing less than 20 meters away from a creature that could probably kill him with its bare hands, while simultaneously composing poetry about the experience. The human species had achieved their position through a combination of traits that violated every known rule of evolutionary development. They possessed neither the strongest bodies nor the fastest reflexes. Their sensory organs were adequate but hardly exceptional. They lacked natural weapons, armor, or chemical defenses. By all logical standards, they should have been extinct within their first million years of existence. Instead, they had become the most feared predators in the galaxy through a combination of intelligence, adaptability, and a psychological profile that made other apex predators question their life choices. Humans didn't just hunt for food or territory. They hunted for sport, for principle, for reasons that no other species could adequately comprehend. They had elevated violence to an art form while simultaneously developing the most sophisticated diplomatic protocols in known space. Most terrifying of all, they were persistence hunters, While other predator species relied on superior speed or strength to bring down their prey, humans simply refused to give up. They would track their targets across star systems through decades of pursuit with the kind of patient determination that made other species develop new forms of anxiety disorders. The human in question appeared to be engaged in some form of commercial transaction with a Velnari merchant, its attention focused on what appeared to be a collection of decorative trinkets. To the casual observer, it looked like nothing more than a harmless tourist browsing for souvenirs. But Vex'thul's enhanced senses were now detecting the subtle signs that marked this being as something far more dangerous, the way it positioned itself to maintain visual contact with multiple potential threats, the slight tension in its muscles that indicated readiness for immediate action, the casual scan of the surrounding area that suggested tactical awareness far beyond what any civilian should possess. This wasn't just any human. This was a human with training, experience, and quite probably a body count that would make Vex'thul's impressive statistics look like amateur hour. Sweat began to bead on Vex'thul's exoskeleton as he contemplated the various scenarios that could unfold if the human became aware of his presence. Best case scenario, he would be ignored as unworthy of attention. Worst case scenario, he would become the subject of a hunting expedition that would likely span several star systems and end with his remains being used as a training aid for human military academies. The predator who had terrorized prey species across dozens of worlds found himself experiencing the unique horror of being potential prey. His legs began to shake as adrenaline flooded his system, preparing his body for the kind of desperate flight that he had never before experienced. The psychological transformation from apex predator to potential prey was perhaps the most disturbing experience of Vex'thul's 2-century existence. Every instinct that had served him throughout his hunting career was now screaming contradictory messages, creating a feedback loop of terror that threatened to paralyze him entirely. His fight-or-flight response had defaulted to flight, but his predatory pride rebelled against the very concept of retreat. How could he, who had never met a challenge he couldn't overcome, simply slink away from a creature that appeared to be shopping for decorative baubles? Yet his rational mind, applying everything he knew about human capabilities, provided a comprehensive list of reasons why immediate withdrawal was not just advisable but absolutely essential for survival. The human had still not acknowledged his presence, continuing its apparently casual examination of the merchant's wares. But Vex'thul's paranoia, now operating at maximum sensitivity, detected subtle signs that suggested otherwise. The being's posture had shifted slightly, indicating awareness of something in its peripheral vision. Its breathing pattern had changed by perhaps 2%, suggesting elevated attention without apparent cause. It knew he was there. The realization sent a fresh wave of terror through Vex'thul's consciousness. The human was not only aware of his presence, but was choosing to ignore him, presumably because he did not represent a significant threat. Being dismissed as unworthy of attention by prey species was humiliating. Being dismissed as unworthy of attention by the galaxy's premier apex predator was a psychological wound that might never heal. But psychological wounds were preferable to actual wounds, and Vex'thul's survival instincts were now operating at full capacity. He began the delicate process of strategic withdrawal, moving with the careful precision of a being who understood that any sudden movement might trigger a response he was unprepared to handle. The irony was not lost on him. Here he stood, a creature whose very presence had cleared rooms and caused diplomatic incidents, attempting to retreat from a being that most observers would classify as harmless. The human continued its shopping with the same casual indifference it might show to a particularly uninteresting piece of furniture. Other patrons of the marketplace had begun to notice the strange tableau. A Skarreth warrior, the stuff of nightmares for most civilized species, was clearly in the grip of some form of psychological distress. Meanwhile, the unremarkable bipedal creature that appeared to be the source of his discomfort continued to haggle over prices with the kind of mundane focus that suggested complete obliviousness to the drama unfolding nearby. Several prey species, recognizing the signs of predator distress, began to exhibit the kind of confused behavior that occurred when the natural order of things was disrupted. If the apex predator was afraid, what did that say about the mysterious creature that was causing the fear? Some began to edge away from the human, while others moved closer, curiosity overcoming caution. The merchant conducting business with the humans seemed entirely unaware of the developing situation, continuing to extol the virtues of various trinkets with the enthusiastic focus of someone who smelled a sale. The human nodded occasionally, asked questions about craftsmanship and origin, and generally conducted itself like any other customer browsing for gifts. But Vex'thul's enhanced senses were picking up details that painted a very different picture. The human's questions revealed knowledge of material science that suggested technical training. Its evaluation of the merchant's wares demonstrated the kind of attention to detail that marked professional assessment rather than casual shopping. Most tellingly, its apparent relaxation never extended to true vulnerability. This was a human conducting reconnaissance while maintaining perfect cover as a harmless tourist. The casual shopping expedition was a masterpiece of tradecraft that allowed the being to gather intelligence about the station's layout, security measures, and population without triggering any of the usual alarms. The full implications of this realization struck Vex'thul like a collapsing star. He wasn't just in the presence of a human. He was in the presence of a human operative conducting some form of intelligence-gathering operation. The kind of human who appeared in briefings marked with security classifications that made strong beings weep. His strategic withdrawal accelerated as discretion overcame the last vestiges of predatory pride. What followed could only be described as the most dignified retreat in the history of apex predation. Vex'thul managed to extract himself from the marketplace without triggering the kind of panic that typically accompanied his departures, though several astute observers noted the unusual spring in his step as he headed for the nearest exit. The human, meanwhile, completed its transaction with the Velnari merchant, purchasing what appeared to be a small decorative sculpture that would have looked perfectly at home on any suburban coffee table. It paid with standard Galactic credits, left an appropriate tip, and thanked the merchant in flawless Velnari trade dialect before strolling away with the casual gait of someone whose biggest concern was finding a decent cup of coffee. The entire exchange had lasted perhaps 15 minutes, during which the fate of the galaxy's most feared predator species had been decided by a being who was now studying a directory map to locate the nearest restroom facilities. The mundane nature of the human's concerns stood in stark contrast to the psychological devastation it had inflicted on Vex'thul's worldview. As word of the incident spread through the station's various information networks, reactions varied according to species and experience level. The prey species who had witnessed the encounter found themselves re-evaluating their assumptions about the nature of galactic hierarchy. If a Skarreth warrior could be reduced to a nervous wreck by something that looked like a mildly athletic accountant, what did that say about their own position in the cosmic food chain? The other predator species represented on the station reacted with the kind of professional interest that marked beings who understood the implications of what they had witnessed. A few made discreet inquiries about the human's identity and purpose, though none were brave enough to approach directly. The general consensus seemed to be that if the human was conducting business on the station, it was best to ensure that such business proceeded without complications. The station's security forces updated their threat assessment protocols to include a new category for beings who could neutralize apex predators through sheer psychological pressure. The human was upgraded to Code Crimson status, a classification typically reserved for unstable antimatter weapons and reality-altering artifacts. Meanwhile, Vex'thul found himself in the unique position of being an apex predator seeking therapy. The station's medical facilities had never before treated a case of existential crisis in a creature designed to be the ultimate expression of evolutionary success. His symptoms included persistent paranoia, chronic anxiety, and an unfortunate tendency to jump at shadows that might possibly be humans in disguise. The human responsible for this psychological carnage was last seen in the station's food court, sampling what appeared to be a grilled cheese sandwich while reading a digital publication that might have been a technical manual or possibly a collection of recipes. It displayed the same casual contentment that had characterized its entire visit, apparently unaware that its mere presence had triggered a minor crisis in the local apex predator community. The irony of the situation was not lost on the station's philosophers, who noted with dry amusement that the galaxy's most feared predator had been neutralized not through superior firepower or advanced technology, but through the simple expedient of existing in the same general area as a species that had evolved beyond the need for such crude displays of dominance. In the end, The human finished its sandwich, disposed of its trash in the appropriate recycling unit, and departed the station via commercial transport with the same unremarkable efficiency that had characterized its entire visit. It left behind a trail of psychological wreckage that would take months to fully repair, and a legend that would be whispered among predator species for generations to come. And thus the cosmic joke continued, as the universe reminded its inhabitants that the most dangerous predators are often those who have transcended the need to look dangerous. The food chain, it seemed, had developed a sense of humor, after all.